Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we dive back into the world of Baby Reindeer and we welcome cinematographer Krzysztof Trojanr. Krzysztof will talk us through his work and the creative decisions that he made on episodes 1 through to 4 of the show. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Krzysztof. Hi Krzysztof, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast.
I'm excited to sit down and talk to you about Baby Reindeer, which, what can I say, is literally taking the world by storm. As somebody who's worked on it, what's it like, the reception of it, and just how it's taken over the world?
Yeah, no, I mean it's definitely not something we were expecting to happen, I guess. We always thought it's gonna be a bit of a niche TV show. And yeah, so it's just a, positive feeling of people appreciating it. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think once you go online with it all and you see how people are reacting to it and just yeah, it must be quite mind-blowing. But then also every time you open up whatever Twitter, Facebook or Instagram and seeing like new reactions to it and also other people's reactions and like even to the point that Stephen King has written a article about it, like that must be pretty like mind-blowing.
I don't know, I don't I think it's probably something we were actually chatting the other day with Veronica. I said like this is probably this is gonna be the most watched thing in our lifetime, if you know what I mean, for our work. So that's kind of feels a bit abstract, but at the end of the day, I think, once you've made it, it kind of lives the life of its own, and your life kind of goes with its own pace. So I think it's just good. It's just good that it's doing well, of course. And yeah, it's good to get more scripts and read more stuff. It's definitely exciting.
Yes, and I can only imagine that like the attraction that it could bring that when some because it's so many people see it all at once, especially with the Netflix model, just how quickly other creatives could probably perk up from seeing your work on the screen as well. But to go back to the beginning, how did the project come about and what made you want to take it on?
So I've known Veronica for years. We went to film school together, and she was doing TV shows before me, and we kind of wanted to work together on something. And I think it's when she got the script for Baby Reindeer. I have done by then. I've worked on a one TV show. It's called 1899, and yes, so I could like, because sort of my background, it's my first TV show I've done as a main DOP who's and set up the look and set up the TV show. So so it was after 1899 I could like interview for something, and producers would give me a credit to join the production, I guess. So yeah, she told me about it. Veronica told me about it, and it sounded really exciting. It was interesting because when she told me what this is about, I was like, okay, well, it sounds very intriguing. But when I read the episode one, I thought that was just incredible. Like, I don't think I have read anything that would engage you so, like, that would like take you in so much, because it was just so well written. the story. It was just so intriguing, so well written, so original. Yeah, so that's how it started.
I think when it's nice when you have someone that you worked with before and because that way, if you do end up working together, you've got a shorthand already and you know how each other work and you don't have someone getting in the way of one another. So if you're left to set up the lights and what the camera's shot and how the position of the camera's going to be, then Veronica can concentrate on the actors and what the scene's going to entail. But then also I've heard a lot from others about how great the scripts are as well. And I guess when you're as a DP, I'm not sure how you break down the scripts, but when you're probably reading it, you probably do you still get do you start getting ideas of how things will look once you read it, or do you allow yourself to read it once and then start going back to it to start picturing how scenes would play out?
I think it depends what you're reading. Usually, I read something. The first time I read something, it's for the story, and I try to follow the story. But you can't help it sometimes. Things come up in your head, and to be honest, if it's so well written, you kind of feel you can start imagining things better, actually. And I think um, from my experience, I think the best scripts or kind of give you that not necessarily information, but just give you a hint of how it could feel. At least that's been my experience in the past. Yeah. So I think with Baby Reindeer it was pretty quickly that you start imagining things.
And where did you begin in your research? Is there certain films and TV shows that you looked at, or paintings to start creating a look and feel to the show?
I think in this case, I read it and there were certain images that came to mind or certain movies maybe that appeared. I think I don't know why one of the first films that came to my head was Fight Club. I think maybe because it's also like a first person narrative through the character, but I also love the kind of the gritty world of it. Obviously, it's a completely different film, and I don't think it was a reference like a clear reference for Baby Reindeer, but there were definitely like these the gritty elements of it that I liked, and they definitely came to my mind. And some other films or some images, and yeah, I think it started with some film titles, and then you kind of go on this journey of looking for images and you I guess because when I got the script I obviously had to interview for for the project after, and I think when I was preparing my mood board I thought, okay, what kind of types of composition could reflect the story, what kind of uh, type of point of view or what kind of type of framing could fit it, and then try to find the titles that would resemble it, I guess, or images sometimes. Yeah, it's a mix.
Mm. And I guess it's kind of interesting, sort of when you say something like Fight Club, because there is that unreliable. Well, we'll put it in air quotes for this show. Is like unreliable narrator. So you're looking through that first person view, and it feels like that's kind of a fly on the wall of what's happening in the show. What I think is quite interesting in the show as well is like the use of space, especially in like those first four episodes that you worked on, because it's always like in either way that somebody's trapped in the space. So, for example, being at the pub where Donnie's behind the bar and then Martha's the other side, he's kind of trapped in that
Mm.
bar area.
Yeah.
Uh, there's the cafe scene as well, where they have all the people around them, and again, Donnie's trapped, and Martha kind of loses it a bit, which is quite scary. And when it happens in such a small space as well, I can imagine it could become quite ear piercing. It doesn't. It's like not until the end of sort of like episode three where you feel like that space gets broken as well. When Martha attacks
Harry. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And you see, yeah, the space gets broken, and then that kind of creates a whole new visual dynamic for a five, six, and seven. Because once we go back to four, once we see that space being used, but it feels more stretched. Right, that it's just like a rather than being trapped in a tight area, you're trapped in a sort of area that's sort of ever expanding that you can never run. No matter how fast you run, you're still going to be trapped in that area
Yeah.
as a DOP, creating that visual language, how did you go about creating that language and wanting to use the idea of the idea and theme of space in the show?
It's interesting you talk about the space. For me, the sense of entrapment, I think that sort of comes from the idea where camera is and what lens it's using to portray the space and portray the characters and their relationship in space in a way. So I think as you talk about it, I we definitely spoke about Martha being intruder, and I think you feel it because we'll kind of go to the beginning of the process. Baby Reindeer is like it's a story told by Donnie from first person point of view, and it kind of came evident when you were reading the script that it's almost like told from like we see Donnie is in the center of the story, and we kind of look almost through his eyes at people or world around him. And Martha is obviously the intruder, and she's literally in his face, and that's reflected by the distance the camera is from characters, and it's reflected by the eye line being so close to the lens that you almost feel, that it's almost the point of view. So you have that closeness and feeling. I mean, I wouldn't call it intimacy, more it's more like intrusion in this case, and that I think reflects how you look at the space because almost the characters are covering it in a way. And yes, and obviously with Donnie being in the pub and Martha kind of being so close to camera that you will always get that feeling that way. And then I think, yeah, in Darian's, then when it goes to episode four, we wanted to use, wider lenses. We wanted a certain type of space with a low ceiling to kind of create that sort of impression of entering a kind of uncomfortable space, which is Darian's flat. And yeah, we used, we used wide focal lengths, particularly for that episode. We used wider, and we never used long lenses on the show, but they were definitely wider than on the previous episodes. And we spoke with production designer, and we discussed how the light would feel there, that there will be no sense of light. There will be a wall behind the windows. You will feel there will be sense of uncomfort and unease. And I think you feel it on sort of every aspect of it, and starting from lensing to production design, ending with acting. I think it's all kind of works together as a feeling of uncomfortable space, particularly in episode four, or being entrapped in like earlier episodes, I think.
This probably sounds a bit silly to say, but it feels so clever to just the use of lenses and the idea of how you can suck audiences in to what they're doing and what they're seeing, especially how you can have the visual language being one way, and then how when you kind of change it up for episode 4, for example. But then also it's also the collaboration that you have with like the production design, saying that even though you're in theory creating this idea, it's when you go on to sort of go onto the stage to actually create the places, that's when it's quite important, as you said as well, with the light coming in with the, we're gonna have a wall there, but it's still the light's gonna come in this sort of way. And like I'm looking at your images as well that you posted on Instagram, and how you can look at the camera placement as well of how where Donnie usually is, because a lot of the time he will be in areas that are central as well,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
which,
definitely.
which you do see in shows. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
anything that's like the
There's
first time it's
nothing
ever
new about
happened.
it in a way, but it reflects the story. This in this particular case, I think.
Yes, and then also you feel like when it's so close up, you kind of feel like he's kind of addressing it. Goes back to that first person perspective, but it feels more that he's addressing you again. And it's in a way you're kind of just there being like, as an audience member, getting so close to his face in a way, and being like, oh, okay, are you sure this is the right thing you should be doing? Should this be happening?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, to add to it, like we went as far as in episode 4. I think I remember reading it and talking with Veronica, and there was definitely this sense of that you sometimes almost feel like you want to elevate yourself out of that room or kind of track far out that it becomes like Donnie becomes like super small on the screen, like you almost like that feeling of there is one can imagine a feeling of a very traumatic experience where almost the consciousness elevates itself from the body in a way. Like, I mean, obviously it sounds very abstract, but I can imagine that there is well, I thought there was like a visual translation of that in a way by going far or and I think we tried that. That's why we kind of we built the Darian's. We were pushing to build the Darian's flat. I don't think many. I don't think people necessarily see it clearly, but for example, in a scene where he gets high and Darian dances in front of him and he takes LSD and he wants to run away from the flat. We actually rebuilt the corridor to be double the length of an original one. So I think originally it was about 4 or 5 meters. So and then in that scene, Debbie, production designer, after our chats, we she built a corridor that was double, like 8 meters long, and I think it's like that almost doesn't feel like a subtle adjustment, but I don't think people necessarily see it so much, but they experiencing it more.
Yes, I think as well, like with builds, because as audience members, we're seeing the sort of final glossy finish of what's been made. So
Yeah.
I don't think you necessarily think about how, as you said, first it would have been a 4 meter corridor, but then you would have doubled it to create that visual impact for what's happening, and having that LSD trip visually. But I still think in the back of my mind, I always think sometimes, I wonder how they did that. I wonder if they did build it bigger, or if it's a case of that they've done some sort of in-camera trick of it's like when they do the
Oh yeah, the
dolly
conference room,
in,
the vertical
yeah,
effect. Yeah,
yeah, the Jaws effect sort of thing.
yeah.
And it's always, I wonder if they did it something like that, because that's always a really cool visual look and style. But at the same time, it's interesting to hear again, like the how important the early stages of prep is when you're talking to people like a production designer and talking to producers about best way of shooting it and making it look great. because I'm sure producers will think about cost wise, but then there's also cost versus how is it going to look at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But then it probably doesn't hurt not having Richard to being the writer and then also the main character, then also probably being a producer, so he can help you guys out, weave in and out with
No,
suggestions.
I think Richard was definitely standing behind us to achieve what, like I think he was trusting us that we're trying to portray the story in the best possible way, and definitely there was I actually don't remember whether we had to push for double the length of corridor, but I'm sure there were somewhere down the line, there were challenges that I'm sure Richard had to back for for them to go forward. I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and also that's just an example, but there's always thousands of conversations that happen about why do we need to do something like this? And then once you kind of change the words from like words to actually how it visually is, looks, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I understand that now.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I don't know if we would have to pitch it, if you pitch it as a concept, it might sound scary or it might sound over the top. But actually, when you look at the scene in the edit, I don't think you actually even realize that that's like I think you realize it on a subconscious level. But I don't think everyone goes, "Oh, that's a double length corridor," if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. And I can imagine even on the biggest of shows, they need to still do what you've done with in terms of like pitching ideas and the concept of it and how it would look in the previews and
Yeah.
what's the best way it can look. But I do think, is the end result is great. So you can't really, yeah, there's nothing more you can really add to it. What I'm curious to know about as well, because there's two cinematographers on the show, there's also and I think it's pronounced Annika Summerson, and then there's also yourself. As you started the series off, you've kind of set the tone visually. But how do you go about discussing with Annika how she's going to shoot her episode so that the tone matches, but then also you both have your own visual spin on it? Oh, sorry, visual signature spin on it.
I think in this case, it was me and Veronica started the show and set the look and feel of it and presented it to Netflix and executive producers and Richard first. Also, Debbie Burton, the production designer, was three of us making a presentation of how we imagine this show to feel, and that's how we that's how we set it all up and shot first four episodes, and then the block two director came in, Josephine and Annika, and they must have been discussing their material, but we kind of wanted also to for it to feel like the same part of the story, and I think that's also a task for them to continue on the look and feel of the show as much as as it fits the story. So I have I have like presented a folder to Annika of how we approached it and what lenses we used and what kind of compositions we've chosen to use for the story, and then they kind of took it on, and they also had said they had their own independent view on it and continue it accordingly to the script. I think we have spoken once or twice about it, and we did a meeting with Veronica and Josephine and Annika to kind of discuss how things are going, and and they saw our rushes, our material from all the days, and they kind of took it on at that point. We wrapped and they continued to shoot it. So yeah, that was the process.
I guess like in a way, it's always interesting to find out because obviously you don't want it to become like a competition or butt heads on what you guys are doing because at the end of the day
Yeah.
you're there in service of a show. But then also you do want your own look and feel to it. But I guess once you sort of decide on the look, then it's sort of like down to yourselves to add in your signature spin and have that right look for what you're going for. And also once the studio sees the rushes, then that sort of like justifies all the decisions that have been made down the line.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I think it's I think you we knew from the beginning we're gonna do a block one, which for us was a story from episode 1 to 4, which kind of felt like a whole chapter that you can tell from start to finish, and then kind of you have to pass on the responsibilities and hope that they will do it the best they can, and then you watch a year later on the on the screen and see how it goes.
Do you ever find, this is something I was thinking about earlier. Do you ever find that because you're working on a show, you do all this, you do the how many takes per scene, and you're kind of there in the sort of rough stages of the show. Do you ever find it once you see the show with all the sound design added in, color correction, and so on, and it being edited, do you ever find it like sometimes just like, wow, like I didn't realize how good this scene actually would turn out once it's all been added together? Or is it a case of more just clapping your peers with how everybody sort of works in the same, it pulls in the same direction to create the scene?
I think in this case, so we wrapped in, I think that was October or November in 2022. And then the editing took probably almost a year or just under a year. I think I started seeing, I've watched I watched finished picture lock episodes in around July. And I remember watching them when they had the temp music, temp sound, and uh, and that was the time when we were grading it before the final sound mix. And I've watched them and I had an idea of where it's all going and the pace and I think you could tell what what was good and what worked the best and which moments you were kind of the most satisfied with. But then it wasn't until the cast and screw screening when I watched the final sound and music, and I must say, for me, it was like a pleasure of seeing it and suddenly feeling that the rhythm and the music elevates the story. And yeah, so it was kind of amazing experience to see it, and it was also we watched it in cinema, so you kind of definitely felt the how the sound was adding to the story, and yeah, that was actually amazing. And I think music elevated it massively as well. I think it's a great score. I sometimes even listen to it on on Spotify, or and also, I must say I was a fan. I've been a fan of these composers before on the Andrei Zvyagintsov movie, which was Loveless. And I do remember, and that was actually I don't know if I can say it or not, but that was like a temp track as we were as they were editing, and it was great to hear that the composers jumped on the project, and I think yeah, that was amazing.
I think it's incredible as well how you're mentioning how it goes from you see sort of like the bones of the scene to then seeing the cast and crew screening and then seeing it and being like, wow, like everybody's sort of singing from the same hymn sheet. And it's funny as well that you're saying that the with the composers that they were using the hip soundtrack of Loveless to then having the same composers on. I think that's also something that, in a weird way, it's like a movie magic fate where they've been working towards one thing, and it's like having those people jump on and then probably made the editors more relaxed and probably easier with their job knowing that they got the same people coming back.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't know the ins and outs, but yeah, probably I'm sure everyone was happy when they decided to work with the composers. I think yeah, they brought something special to this show.
Mm. And I think this is not really a show that needs to have the like a really bombastic soundtrack like Oppenheimer, for example, or Inception. It just needs something that's what is that, that sort of that feeling that needs to be lingering in your diaphragm of like something is not right and something's wrong. What's going on? And
Yeah.
yeah, it works perfectly. And it's funny as you say as well, when you're listening to it on Spotify, like I can imagine you just on the tube listening to it, being like, something's going down, and then getting loads of sort of different ideas flowing into your head.
Yeah.
There's the show does deal with really heavy subject matter, and there are a number of scenes that are very traumatic and hard to watch as audience members. But as someone who, as a DOP and cinematographer, how do you go about capturing those scenes? One, in a respectable manner, and two, not getting in the way of like an actor's performance.
I think we discussed in advance how we're going to film it, and I think everyone, including the actors, well, first and foremost, actually, the actors in this case, they were fine with it. I don't think there was any moment where anyone said, "Oh, this is," because we decided to continue on our. It was, the camera was in a place where it would usually be, so it was close to Donnie, and in this case it was as well. And I don't think anyone was ever against it. I guess the only thing that comes to my mind was that we definitely didn't want to over rehearse anything, and so we actually had stand-ins on set for this particular time when we were shooting episode 4. We would always rehearse on stand-ins to always give as much space and sort of, yeah, space for the actors, so they wouldn't have to feel the intrusion of camera for too long.
I always think that's just such a sort of interesting process because it is. I guess it's the same with any performance that's harrowing, or even a performance with action or comedy. Just how the camera is placed and how, even though you're blocked scenes and prepared for them, just you still don't want it to be in the way of what people are doing. And especially in a show like this where you are quite close up on people's faces and I can imagine. I doubt this happened, but if they moved a bit too much, accidentally headbutting the camera and hurting themselves. But I'm sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I think it was okay. Also, it was actually, we shot it at the end of the schedule, pretty much last 2 weeks, I think. And at that point, we all knew each other. We had spent a lot of time together, and it was, yeah, I think that kind of sense of familiarity and being there together and going through all the 50 days or 40 days by then. I think that helped also to kind of help the comfort, and almost, to a point where obviously the crew members were also responding to the material and how we, when we were filming those scenes, it was tough for everyone and obviously tough for actors, but it wasn't. Everyone kind of was living it in a way, to a degree, and there was a sense of I feel that there was a sense of familiarity around the crew, and everyone was respectable and respectful and also kind of trying to not get in the way at that point.
Okay. Yeah, again, that's another thing. If you have when once you're sort of in the full swing of shooting as well, you are living and breathing the show, and everybody on set sort of becomes your family just because you spend so much time with
Yeah.
one another, which is another crazy thing, just the amount of time that you spend with one another.
Yeah.
Just to hit you with my penultimate question, what was your favorite scene that you didn't shoot?
My favorite, my favorite scene that I didn't shoot. I think I like the scene in I mean, out of the scenes I haven't shot, I think there's a scene in the courtroom with Martha that I really like. I think, well, I really like. I just find it so moving in episode 7, as far as I remember well. That is, that definitely struck me, and I think you start feeling different things for the character. So that was definitely like one of the most moving scenes from the part we haven't done. Yeah, but I was also, I must say, I was very happy with what we've done, and kind of for me the journey ended there. And it was also good to see the part of Baby Reindeer that I watched as the audience, if you know what I mean, which felt great.
Yes, and I think as well, like that's a solid choice on that scene because I feel like the whole, it's like not, I wouldn't say the whole sort of fantasy element of the show because it's not fantasy, but it's the hyper sensitive version of the show, and then everything kind of comes to still of realization of like what are the consequences of people doing stuff like this, and
Hmm.
not necessarily people realizing the consequences as well until they're there. Then they're maybe crocodile tears, maybe real tears, who knows? But it could be part of the act of like how someone is with like behaving in that sort of manner. And there's also like the realization is probably the relief of Donnie in those scenes as well. But it just he still can't get that Martha-shaped person off his back. He has to sort of keep digging and digging, which is interesting because usually you think it would be a relief that they've been arrested, that's done, they're in court, but then there's just something still scratching away there.
Yeah, but I also feel like you feel for her as a vulnerable person as well. Like you see that despite what happened, it's not, she's not totally in control of it. And I think you see kind of the tragedy of it all. It's not that obviously she's a stalker, but also she may be in some moments. There are moments of clarity where she sees what she's done, and yeah, it's just moving the it's kind of end to this like harrowing long journey, and yeah, you kind of feel for both of them on this.
Yeah, and isn't that funny as well as audience that you kind of get that feeling rather than, as you said in that scene being betrayed, that you kind of feel sorry for her rather than being like, yeah, you've deserved what you've got.
Yeah, yeah, I think
You,
that's the strong element.
yeah. And then just to hit you with my final question, what was your favorite scene to shoot?
I don't know if I have a favorite scene. I definitely and like I definitely what's the word? I don't know what's the word for it, but like I was very glad we shot episode 4, and I think that was the most fulfilling episode to make. And I do remember enjoying. I remember we had a lot of fun shooting the Scottish pub. So begin from episode 4 when Donnie's the Donnie is developing his comedy show, and I think the way we kind of try to tell the story through camera movement in that pub and the events that happened, there was a lot of, I don't know, it was very satisfying to kind of do this, long moving shots of telling the story of Donny in this particular place. So that was a lot of fun to do, and it was still quite light before it all got really dark. So I think that was quite pleasant, and it was pub down the road from my house, so it was like a few fun days to do. So I do remember it as a kind of few fun days, but I think overall episode 4 was the most satisfying and the most story-wise, it was something where y- where we could explore more the visual language, if you know what I mean.
Again, solid choice. I think you could probably have a lot of fun in how you're presenting Donnie and his stand-up routine in terms of just visually with the way that he's performing it and how the camera can move with that. But then also the reaction of audiences. I always find that sort of thing when you get a cut to it, could be quite funny, and you can get different variations of what people are seeing of his performances. And then it's also, if you're having those longer takes, the discipline that you would need you're installing your crew so that they can
Yeah.
keep going what they're seeing, then also not break by laughing what they're seeing on screen, because that's probably one thing that on comedies probably drives people mad, is that there could be a scene where they need silence on set and then somebody's just riffing loads and they can't help but laugh, and you get slightly involved in the scene as well by laughing and not wanting to, like I can imagine like a focus puller like sitting there kind of shaking with laughter, but then not making sure that they can still pull the focus.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that was definitely the case with all the Steadicam sequences in the pub because we knew we had in the pub in the Scottish pub there was definitely that kind of sense of when when we block the camera and camera is moving almost 360 in the pub and there's certain moves orchestrated around the space and you have a tight schedule, but you still want to nail it, and you do 3, 4 takes, and then you're kind of waiting for that perfect take, and it's great to watch when it all kind of lands in its place.
And it's also that you mentioned something as well with the 360 and the takes and the Steadicam. Again, the interesting use of space of how much open and free it is, and how, okay, granted, because there's not many people there, but there is a sense of freedom and how it looks visually with how much space Donnie has to work around, or even if he needed to run away from something, he is able to run away. And then that's the sort of like half of that episode is the visual language is slightly changed. So that's like pre meeting Darian.
Yeah, no, definitely there's like I think a sense of freedom in those moments for sure. And in Edinburgh, although it's not going very well, there is a sense of optimism and freedom, and then kind of I think that does reflect in what you look at. Yeah,
And I can imagine as well the like as a DOP being having that what's it called, having the freedom to have you use that space and kind of have your Steadicam guy be able to move around rather than being in a more confined tight area.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Although it's sometimes tricky when and I think Veronica wanted it a lot on this show that you kind of look at space wide shot and then you push in all the way to a close up. That's always like a lighting challenge, I think, to some degree. So yeah, it was it was definitely a satisfying thing to do for sure.
And that's one thing I probably would be an absolute headache is the lighting setups, especially if you are in such a big area moving around because you can't just hide a key light here or hide a little light there. You have to be amount of planning that you must do as well. Then the mental gymnastics on the day of like, if you're doing a location scouting and being like, this will be here, this will be here. Actually, no, we can't have this here. And it's just like, okay, breathe. We can do this. We'll move this around.
Well, it's funny, yeah. I mean, in this particular case, the pub is not a set build, but like if you look at the space, and it's a pub in London where we shot, we essentially turned it into a studio. We blocked all the windows. We would build huge tents outside to put the lighting in, so we had consistent conditions throughout the space because we were shooting there, I think. I don't know, for about 5 days. And, we kind of wanted, and, we would, the scenes would stretch over time. And you know how it is in London. Can be 15 minutes, can be very cloudy, and then you've got a sun, and then 2 hours later you've got rain, and it's completely gray and dark. So yeah, there was a little bit of thought to planning to how we're gonna do it, as much to control it as much as possible in this case.
Yeah, and I can imagine, especially with London, the quick change of weather. It's yeah, once you've got it, you just need to go, 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 and then hope for the
Yeah,
best, really.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I think it's the most challenging weather-wise location I get to shoot. I think England is like where just kind of wet, like sometimes it's interesting. You talk with the crew, and I don't know, the AD or the producer says, "Oh yeah, but it's forecast," and there's been so many days where I shot in London and it was full forecast, and then 15 minutes later there's a full sunshine, and then half an hour later there's full overcast again. It's so unpredictable.
Yeah, and
So you have
again,
to be prepared. You have to be prepared, basically. And kind of think of on your feet, or just have enough thought and tools to kind of deal with it.
yes, and making sure you're somehow prepared, even though you don't know what's going to happen every
Yeah.
15 minutes. Again, mental. Krzysztof, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Baby Reindeer is streaming now on Netflix. Go out and watch Krzysztof and his team's work. I'm sure people listening have probably already seen it, but go out and watch it again and enjoy Krzysztof's work. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you for having me. Thanks.
You take care and bye bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.